session of the UN Environment Assembly. The English edited version of the report was circulated to member states, observers, and major groups and other stakeholders on 10 October 2023. We will first hear a presentation by the Executive Director on her report, after which the floor will be open for comments by delegations in the room and online. So those, as usual, in the room can request for the floor by using the microphone button. And those online, please use the raise hand function. And if you have logged in online with just your name, it would be great if you could identify your name together with your delegation name, so it would be easier for us to give you the floor. And without further ado, I now invite the Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme, Ms. Inga Andersen, to brief the membership. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chalik. Distinguished Excellencies and delegates and colleagues, and let me again apologize for the postponement of Monday, and let me also in advance apologize if I cannot continue, because this very persistent cough that I'm struggling with. I do ask for your understanding. But let me just say that it's a real pleasure for me to be here today and to present this report well ahead of the Assembly. And as I reflect on last year's and past multilateral work, and you've heard me say this before, 2023 really was a year of success for the environment. We saw the big win for oceans with the BBNJ. We saw the biodiversity agreement in 2022. We also saw BRS in May of this year that delivered a new compliance mechanism, a mechanism that has been under negotiation for more than a decade. And of course, on the sidelines of the UNEP, of the UN General Assembly, we really pushed, and the whole world pushed on the SDGs. And a few weeks out, we should be meeting in Dubai, where we will take stock, the global stock take, as well as obviously there will be a big focus on loss and damage. But the truth is that we are not done, and that this triple planetary crisis remains a priority. And UNEP 6 is a real opportunity to build on the successes that you created in UNEP 5, but also to look to the future, to look at solutions, to look at science, and to base everything that we do with solution orientation, supporting member states, building on science, and ensure that it is inclusive and that it concerns, that it takes a whole of society approach. And understanding this, therefore, that the SDGs are the building block upon which everything else is made. And if we understand the SDGs, we also understand the legacy of the SDGs, taking us right back to the Rio Summit in 1992, and in fact, taking us right back to the Stockholm Summit in 1972, which is what the report also highlights. Because the environment is, of course, only as good and as strong as society and economy is, and understanding this three-legged stool is important. But we deal with the environmental implications of sustainable development. And so I'm very much aware that there are many issues that would be of importance to UNEA. And I don't want to dismiss other issues that member states may have in mind as an important potential resolution space. In this report, however, what I try to do is to not have the whole list that might include everything that everybody is considering, but to highlight a few waves that are on our shores, that are on the ocean, but that may at some point hit our shores, and for which it is my advice that member states may wish to look at that within the context of the UNEA. And that is what we have done here, putting forward 6 areas plus 1 for member states' potential consideration, knowing well that anything to do with resolutions is the realm and solely the realm of member states. However, for us, it is also our duty to look at science and to be the voice on the global environment, and to ensure that we watch those waves on the oceans and that are likely to crash on civilizations shores. So therefore, we highlight these areas and the first of potential that member states may wish to consider for potential resolution space within the context of well understanding that this is member state space. And the first deals, of course, with the historic Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This was a historic framework, and we're very proud that Elizabeth Marema was the architect of that, so to speak, under obviously the presidency of China and the leadership of China. But the sense here is that there is an opportunity for stepping up in any number of areas. And we didn't wish to highlight all the targets that are listed in the Kunming-Montreal Montreal Biodiversity Framework because member states have already agreed. But we felt that we might wish to highlight one particular aspect, notwithstanding that the whole framework is important, because it is an aspect that has been somewhat overlooked. And thus, well understanding that is a full package and well understanding that is not a menu from which you choose a meal, but nevertheless, having the understanding that Indigenous people will play and can play an absolutely critical role in the delivery of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and beginning to work that in more in depth is one of the issues that we highlight here. Now, I need to stress, of course, that I understand very well that it's a full package and that all targets matter. But we will continue, obviously, as UNEP, to be one of the leaders in supporting member states to deliver on biodiversity. There are thankfully many others too who do this, and that is critical. But we would like to think that UNEA may wish to, in some way, shape or form, take note of this historic agreement and put to UNEP's charge the reinforced efforts that this agreement has presented to the world and indeed to UNEP, with a special emphasis, of course, as I mentioned here, as I just mentioned, on Indigenous people. The second point that we highlight in this paper is, again, taking inspiration from the water conference that took place in March in New York. And as member states will be well aware, it has been a very, very long time since water was considered in such a global conference. Having this conference, we think, began to highlight the absolute imperative of dealing with water, all the more so in a context of climate change, because climate change really often shows up as either too much water or too little, as either floods or inundations, or droughts and harvest failure, etc. So the climate, land, water nexus and biodiversity obviously are very much interlinked. And we felt that having had the water conference, excuse me, member states may wish to put extra stress on the absolute imperative of UNEP's role playing within the space, not of water supply and sanitation, obviously. There are others that do that, but in the large watershed, as we often say, the big water resources management, the too little, the too much, the nature-based solutions that can be deployed to help in this regard, as well as the climate nexus. So this was another point that we highlighted here. Truth be told, I have to say that today our water team is very small, and so it's not, you can count them on less than one hand, but it's obviously an area where we feel we need to scale up and become bigger. The third area that we put forward for member states' consideration is one that UNEA has previously have considered and considered well and given good guidance to UNEP, as well as to member states themselves. because the truth is, of course, that we are on the cusp of a critical minerals transition and linked to shifts in energy and mobility. And so finding a way that harmonized frameworks can really catalyze responsible mining and significantly improve the sustainability of the mining of minerals and metals that we know is yet to come and that no one will deny is critical. But at the same time, what would it look like if, as part of that mining expansion, which has to come, I think we all understand, there is a better understanding on ecological, of minimizing ecological impacts, of maximizing labor rights, and which is not our work, but which is our work of our friends in Geneva, and and to ensure that the work that we've already done previously on mining can take a step forward into this important area where member states may wish to direct UNEP as to how you wish to see us lean in on this area that I know member states are quite seized with. I should mention that the International Resources Panel, the IRP, has three, sorry, excuse me, has three upcoming reports that will hopefully help inform and catalyze and fill knowledge gaps on this issue. A fourth area deals with advancing cooperation around nutrients and especially phosphorus. I wish to ensure everyone that it is not COVID. As member states are well aware, fertilizers and nutrients are absolutely critical for many farming processes, and so that is clear. But we also know that at time, whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, etc., carbon and potassium are overused. Tim, I'm gonna have to ask you to take it.
Thank you. Let me continue on behalf of the Executive Director. Yes, the fourth issue is around thank you. The fourth area is around advancing cooperation on nutrients, and in this case, particularly phosphorus. As the Executive Director was just saying, nutrients, of course, are critical for food systems and for providing the necessary foods and nutrients that we need. However, excess nutrients do continue to cause a problem in the environment. We have done quite a bit of work in the past on nitrogen. We've had nitrogen resolutions. We have a nitrogen group and a nitrogen partnership, but there has been a bit of a blind spot on phosphorus in international nutrient management. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework does provide, through its target number 7, renewed attention to this issue. And so we believe that though we do have some successful and existing frameworks and initiatives on nitrogen, we can get more out of our efforts to expand and include phosphorus in this work. So this is why we have put this issue forward. The fifth one is on climate altering technologies and measures.
And maybe I'll try to take it from here if I can. Sorry for that. And thank you, Tim, for being my alter ego here. Climate altering technologies and measures. in a way, we have to think of it a little bit like AI. Can it be put back in the box once it's out of the box? And I wish to approach it from this manner. We know that climate altering technologies and measures don't solve the GHG emissions issue. They do not solve the climate crisis. But we also do know that research, as well as some experimentation indoor, etc., is on foot. And we also know that there are increasing voices calling for governance of research and/or governance of deployment. And there has, in the last 12 months, been an increasing interest in this area. I wish to recall, as you saw in the paper, that this is not the first time that this has been raised, because foresighted individuals raised it in COP10 of the CBD, as you will be aware, in 2010. Other foresighted individuals raised it in the raised geoengineering in the context of the London Convention of our friends in the IMO. And other foresighted individuals raised it in 2019 inside the ozone MOP that was held in Rome. And so my point in putting this on the docket for member states' consideration is not to promote a technology. It's very important. But it is to be mindful that this is happening in some places. As we speak, research is important, but it's important that we, in my view, have a global conversation around this issue. There's a need for all member states to have a better understanding of the status of the research, of the development, as well as the risks and uncertainties to inform decision making. So I'm well aware that this is considered very, very controversial. But sometimes technologies, once they have been invented or even speculated upon, cannot be put back in the box. And this is why I put it in this paper. Member states will also be aware that we issued a report called One Atmosphere some months back, and that this report is a sort of 101 to understanding better the ABCs of what is solar radiation modification. And the next issue that we highlighted deals with aligning the financial system for sustainability. As member states will be well aware, we are very proud hosts, if you like, and of the principles of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and UNEP FI does incredibly important work. That is really what success looked like. Bringing banks together, having them sign up, moving them along a spectrum towards greater sustainability in their investment portfolio. But there's quite a lot of pushback here and there on voluntary and regulatory action that incentivizes sustainable finance and climate action. Antitrust concerns continue to undermine voluntary action on climate change and sustainability objectives. And public policy and regulatory shifts are urgently needed, including science-based sectoral transition pathways to align with the 1.5-degree goal. And I believe that this is where UNEA can help push for clear and transparent regulatory criteria for sustainable economic action, for green sustainable taxonomies, to enable the development of a reliable credit market system that can mobilize finance for sustainable economic transition. So that was yet another area that we put forward for your consideration. Finally, as not as a resolution, but we put for you the consideration of looking at our financing without asking for something directly. But when we went through our 50th anniversary and spoke to many of the originators that were present in 1972, we became aware that during that time, and it is reflected in the literature, there were countries who were looking at an environment fund in 72 money that would be at $100 million a year. And I think that that was the right consideration back in the day. As you know, we are not even at $90 million a year on the environment fund 50 years later. So I do think that it might be useful for member states to reflect on this, and of course being aware that in 2021 there was indeed a study and reflections done on how to ensure more sustainable funding for UNEP. So whilst I'm not necessarily suggesting a resolution, I did add that point in the paper for member states' reflection and consideration. So with that then, and apologize again for this poor delivery here, let me thank for this opportunity, and I look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Executive Director for her briefing. The floor is now open for delegations. As indicated before, please use the microphone to be inscribed on the list. And if you're online, please use the raise hand function. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Radhika. And first of all, I would like to thank you, Madam Edie, and your team for the report and their consideration entitled Effective, Inclusive and Sustainable Multilateral Actions to Tackle Climate Change, Biodiversity Loss and Pollution. This report, which is reflective of the theme of the 6th session of UNEA, is really very helpful in a way that it is kickstarting in a very efficient way the discussions that UNEA 6 will be having on those effective and sustainable multilateral actions that we will need to agree upon to address the 3 planetary crises and their impact on the environment and subsequently on humanity. The link between poverty eradication, development, and the critical issue of tackling the environmental dimension of sustainable development while flagging the delays in achieving SDGs 2030 is very relevant and commendable, precisely when we are halfway to 2030 and far from achieving SDGs. Isn't that due to insufficient global action to tackle the 3 planetary crises? Isn't that what has motivated us to choose for UNEA 6 a theme that is action-oriented, a theme that has placed multilateralism at the center of our actions, and actions that we want to be effective and sustainable in order to tackle the 3 planetary crises? We cannot agree more with you, Madam Edie, that science, political willingness, and engagement through a whole of a society approach are crucial to transformative actions that can put environment at the heart of policymaking and subsequently contribute to address poverty, social and economic inequalities. The multilateral achievements with key decisions at several levels, from climate change with the loss and damage fundings and the threshold to global warming of 1.5 centigrade decisions, the NCDD decisions, the Water Action Agenda, the resolution on the human right to a clean and healthy environment, and the breakthrough for biodiversity within the coming Montreal Protocol, including the marine biodiversity agreements and targets, including the BBNG Treaty, which is a real win for the ocean. And Morocco is very proud to be among the signatories of this treaty last September 2023. In addition, the measures taken to tackle plastic pollution, all the other subject resolutions of previous UNEAs that are the result of multilateralism need, however, to be implemented through appropriate funding and an integrated approach where member states, civil society, and all stakeholders, including from the private sector, are equally involved. We do recognize the existing working group on metals and minerals. actually intergovernmental consultations on metals and minerals, and also the platform on nitrogen to which Morocco is participating. But we do need to understand that fertilizers, nutrients are critical for food security, and therefore there has to be a clear understanding that no decision should be taken to stop or prevent developing countries, including LDCs, from their right to cultivate their land and produce their own food. In that vein, we do appreciate, Madam Edie, that you did point out the crucial vitality of the use of fertilizers and nutrients. Madam Edie, UNEA is certainly the most important and unique multilateral forum that can deliver a consolidated multilateral response to the environmental crisis and their consequences on the economic and social levels. Such a forum, which is the highest global decision-making body that has reached in the past agreements on the most environmental pressing issues, is vital to continue providing multilateral solutions to environmental crises and thus contribute significantly to the achievement of SDGs. Morocco, as the presidency of UNEA 6, is striving to make of UNEA 6 a successful session with the help of all member states. The work that has already started on the ministerial declaration that Morocco is leading in a very transparent and inclusive manner, and which is going to top up the important outcomes of UNEA 6, will hopefully deliver, we hope for it, an agreed upon action-oriented ministerial declaration that will help strengthen and consolidate collective environmental action. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Morocco, and I now give the floor to the representative of Costa Rica. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. The delegation of Costa Rica thanks Madam Executive Director and UNEP Secretariat for the rich and detailed report towards UNEA 6. Costa Rica strongly recognizes the link to humanity's relationship with the natural world sustainably and sees value in UNEA 6 as a means to achieve this. We cannot agree more with the idea that multilateralism is not only possible, but the only way forward. The multilateral efforts to address the triple planetary crisis, plus the negative impacts of climate change, nature and biodiversity loss, pollution and waste, land degradation and desertification, are profoundly interconnected, but also deeply fragmented in the international arena. There is a need to break down those silos and foster collaborative action to achieve a successful result. Therefore, our delegation aspires to UNEA 6, developing a consolidated and a harmonized multilateral response to the planet's environmental crisis, interwoven with economic, social, and environmental impacts. This multilateral action will only be effective and sustainable if inclusive, setting aside political tensions in order to achieve the greater good. We strongly agree that UNEA 6 must bring together voices from across the spectrum of science, policy, and business, as well as across regions, languages, cultures, and indigenous knowledge. Our delegation also sees the need to mainstream nature-based solutions throughout the work of UNEP and other MEAs. Costa Rica hopes that the resolutions adopted by UNEA will be action-oriented and strengthen UNEP's work, leaving no one behind. The urgency for all countries to come together to fulfill the promise of the United Nations is imperative, more now than ever, and our planet's survival depends on it. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Costa Rica, and I now invite the representative of Brazil. Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Brazil would like to thank you, Madam Executive Director, for a well-drafted and thoughtful report setting out the visions and expectations of UNEP for UNEA 6. Our experts in Brasilia carefully analyzing the technical aspects of the document for our upcoming discussions. Today, I would like to concentrate on the vision of sustainable development that is addressed in the document and the important role played by the environmental pillar among the social and economic dimensions. The consensual multilateral guidelines in favor of a stern defense of sustainable development are a reality that imposes itself as an economic, political, and social necessity, not only for Brazil, it is an ethical imperative to the world. Brazil's vision about the centrality of the discussion of sustainable development in UNEP and during UNEA 6 is crystal clear. Advancing in the fight against our environmental challenges can only be done by, at the same time, facing rising inequalities and poverty. But let me focus on the report. Brazil finds it appropriate a reference in the first two introductory paragraphs to the use of social lenses to address the environmental crisis that touch the lives of billions of people and represent additional barriers to the social development of countries. But once again, the report innovates in using non-consensual adjectives to define the environmental crisis. Brazil believes that there is something in the initial paragraphs that should have been subject to a more sensitive editorial effort. And in saying that, I want to recognize that a document of this kind is made by many hands, and there are many unseen authors of this document. So I take this circumstance into account. But the selective choice of one sentence from one of Ms. Indira Gandhi's speeches to illustrate the social preoccupation that should have inspired the bulk of the report leads to an imperfect understanding of the context of the world in 1972. Besides, the quote may be read by some as an apparent attempt to withdraw the political message contained in the historical speech. Ms. Gandhi's words should be read in their full content. Her speech intended to bring a clear message to the world. Developing countries have their own pressing challenges to raise the standard of living of millions of our citizens. She underscored the injustice and inequity in the fact that countries with a small fraction of the world's population consumed the largest part of the Earth's natural resources, causing far greater environmental degradation than what countries like India and Brazil, developing countries, were doing. Does anybody ignore that she was referring to our common but differentiated responsibilities to solve the environmental crisis, a fundamental concept ignored by some in our days? Now, some want this forum to innovate again and speak about, and I quote, respective capabilities, end of quote, a non-consensual creative expression with obvious political and practical implication. This is the wording introduced in the second draft of the ministerial declaration. You do not expect Brazil to keep silent about this. Brazil notes that the report does not deal properly with an irrefutable element of reality. The undesirable effects of climate change affect vulnerable populations in a much more perverse way. Brazil innovates in tackling these problems. Contemporary concepts such as climate justice and environmental racism, I'll say it again, some doesn't like the use of this expression, environmental racism, have become part of the national and international public opinion debate. There is an urgent need for UNEP to bring to the front stage cross-cutting considerations on environmental justice. Madam Chair, I'm concluding my comments. On a different note, I would like to thank you, Madam ED, for the proposals in the document that are related to and advance the objectives of the UNEP at 50 declaration. Among others, the declaration also invites the governing bodies of all the multilateral environmental agreements to consider convening their meetings more frequently in Nairobi. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for your efforts in this regard. Finally, I understand that finance and implementation are included in the identified focus areas. In this sense, we would like to understand what can be done or has been done about paragraph 23 of the UNEP at 50 declaration, which invites UNEP to identify further options for assisting member states to improve the implementation of their environmental objectives at the national level, including access to scientific information, technologies, technical assistance, and financial resources. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Brazil, and I now give the floor to the representative of Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Colombia would like to express its appreciation to the Executive Director for her report to the 6th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. In this regard, Colombia considers that the approach and issues presented in the report offer an appropriate framework to orient the discussions in UNEA 6. In this regard, Colombia, as a country part of the Amazon basin and owner of vast areas of tropical forest, wishes to highlight the role that forest ecosystems play in the fight against planetary environmental crises, which currently threaten the conservation of its rich biodiversity, as well as the well-being and livelihoods of the communities that depend on the contributions and ecosystem service they provide. Furthermore, the loss of forest ecosystems undermines the traditional management that indigenous peoples, Afro-descendant communities, and other local communities inhabit them have traditionally carried out in these territories in accordance with their worldview and traditional knowledge, which has been crucial for their conservation. Therefore, Colombia, which signed the Leticia Pact and the Belém Declaration with the other Amazon countries, and which participate in the summit of the three basins held in the Republic of Congo, calls for the importance of tropical forest conservation and its links to the fight against biodiversity loss, climate change, pollution, land degradation, and deforestation, among other issues, to be highlighted in the discussions and expected results of UNEA 6. Thank you very much.
I thank the Ambassador of Colombia, and now I give the floor to the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, of course, thanks to Executive Director for presenting this report to us and allowing us to discuss that report well in time ahead of UNEA 6. And thanks to all the joint teamwork to prepare and present that report. We find that this is really well-structured and clear report, which presents the issues in a very succinct manner, and it will really help the European Union and the member states to define and finalize our proposals for UNEA 6. At the beginning, I'll share a couple of general comments, and then we'll go in a bit more detailed comments on each of the themes. So I think I'll start with this, that of course we agree with UNEP and with the ED with her statement in the report that UNEP is a custodian of the environmental dimension of Agenda 23, and it needs to have sufficient resources to implement its mandate. And in this regard, we repeat the call to all member states to contribute to UNEP's funds according to their voluntary contributions. We also find it important that in 2024, UNEA 6 would send an ambitious message to the Summit of the Future on the importance of achieving the environmental dimension of the sustainable development and the key role of UNEP and UNEA in that respect. We also support your statement on importance of implementation of the agreed commitments. We already have many of them, and it would have been excellent if the report provided a bit more of insights from Executive Director on how we could translate multilateral ambitions to actions at different spatial levels. While recognizing the link between poverty and environmental degradation, we also believe that inequality is another important driver for environmental degradation. In light of a just transition, we see the need to cut excessive consumption and develop a narrative around sufficiency and efficiency. The report of the Executive Director also mentions sustainable consumption and production, as well as circular economy, but we would have liked to have more attention on these two elements, as they are cross-cutting and they affect all the three crises. Current unsustainable consumption and production are perhaps the key drivers to the triple crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. This is why we believe that UNEP should pay more attention to the opportunities that resource efficiency increase and circular economy can provide to all of us. If we want to address the triple planetary crisis, we must step up action at all levels to decouple economic growth from environmental degradation and primary resource consumption, and this was already stated back at UNEA 4. And now I would like to go in a couple of more detailed comments on each of the themes that are explored in your report. So first, we believe that the 6 issues mentioned in the report should be considered as priority and they should be addressed at UNEP. If there is any chance that Executive Director would consider amending the report after this meeting, we believe it would be helpful to have a bit more explicit reference to criteria presented in paragraph 17 when presenting the 6 themes. So we can see that how these criteria can be applied for each of the 6 themes. Now going into each of them. The EU and the member states are in full agreement that we need to implement the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and this must be a priority to everyone. However, would like to ask whether the focus on Indigenous peoples is the area where UNEP can offer a major contribution to the implementation. We would appreciate some further explanation on this, especially looking at the mandate of UNEP and its limited presence at country level. A second comment on this theme is that when we refer to the Global Biodiversity Framework, it would be best to use the terminology already agreed at the agreement. In other words, we would like to see references to Indigenous peoples and local communities. In her presentation, the ED mostly addressed this question, but if there is any other additional comments, we would be happy to hear that. For the second theme on water and integrated approaches to water management, this is also a very topic to the EU and our member states. We also feel that we have a good opportunity to follow up on the UN Water Conference. While in the theme B, most of the focus is on fresh water, the ED also briefly refers to oceans in the paragraph 33. Therefore, would like to ask whether the UNEP sees merit in a resolution on oceans. If so, which elements you would see as most important? In addition, and again, if any further changes will be made to this draft report, we would like to propose for the Executive Director to consider referring to the parties to Paris Agreement and not to parties to the UNFCCC, because the NAPs and the NDCs are actually under the Paris Agreement. On the theme C, responsible mining and sustainable minerals. The EU and member states support this proposal and would like to react positively to continuation of work on developing policy frameworks for responsible mining. However, we would appreciate some further explanation about the role of the Global Forum on Mining, Minerals, Metals, and Sustainable Development, if that is possible. On the theme D, we do understand that proposal for the theme on nutrients and especially phosphorus is very important. However, as also you, Edie, mentioned, the extensive work already done on nitrogen, we would like to ask if UNEP would seek to ensure any synergies of the work being done on nitrogen with the new work which would potentially be done on phosphorus. On the theme E, on climate altering technologies and measures, I think we have a bit more comments and questions. We of course welcome that ED's report considers this as a very important topic, and we take note of the possible idea to initiate an ad hoc technical expert group to work on climate altering technologies and measures. But we would like to ask whether UNEP would want to focus on both carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation modification, or only one of them as a matter of priority, because currently we see the theme as to be very broad and covering both areas. We consider that it's important to clearly separate discussions on CDR and SRM. Both types of technologies are at very different stages of research and development, and they have very different associated environmental, social, security, and ethical risks. Therefore, the two areas, the CDR and SRM, should be clearly separated in discussions provided in the report. And to get in a bit more detail, would like to recall that relevant environmental principles such as precautionary approach, as well as obligations of states on climate change mitigation should always come first. And this we haven't seen mentioned in the report. Also, would like to avoid any suggestion that stratospheric aerosol injection is to any extent a mature technology. Maybe this was not intention, but perhaps it can come across as such. So both SRM and CDR come with serious risks and both merit equal attention, which we feel is not there in the report. Additionally, for potential consideration, we suggest possible reference to the Montreal Protocol, under which some of the mentioned technologies are being discussed. And so I'd like to finish with these comments because we do not have comments on the last theme. I thank you very much.
I thank the European Union, and I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam ED, for your report. Argentina believes in and works for a strong environmental multilateralism and therefore for a strong UNEA, in which member states gather to assess the state of the environment and come up with consensual intergovernmental solutions to address the challenges that our shared environment faces. Argentina therefore takes note of the report of the ED, which we retain as a valuable input ahead of UNEA 6 for member state to consider as appropriate. Understanding also that this may come as the first of many reports for future UNEAs, we suggest for future occasions to take advantage of the presence of member states here in Nairobi to run consultations that may allow to refine the content of the report in light of member state priorities and concerns ahead of its publication. On the content of the report, we are, of course, as many other here, running internal consultations, but here are some points that we would like to share with the distinguished representatives of member states for their consideration. First of all, as also mentioned by others before us, Argentina will be a strong defender of a balanced approach to sustainable development in all resolutions that UNEA will consider. This means taking always into account that the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development are at the same level, recognizing that, on the one hand, the environment underpins sustainable development, but on the other, and at the same time, economic and social progress is a prerequisite for environmental sustainability. Secondly, we will advocate to avoid duplications and to avoid having discussions in UNEA that are being dealt with somewhere else. While we consider that more work on nutrients or water may be necessary, we wonder whether UNEA will be able to fully cover the extension of those issues that have a long tradition of work, for example, in FAO, where there is an already existent international code on sustainable use and management of fertilizers. Thirdly, regarding the proposals on critical minerals, we would like to recommend to work on ensuring responsible mining and sustainable use of or management of minerals and metals. It could be beneficial, for example, to look into specific cases of how developing countries can address the identified challenges in an effective manner, considering their own needs, priorities, and national circumstances, and emphasizing the need for international cooperation. Fourthly, with regards to the section on climate-altering technologies and measures, Argentina would like to highlight that there is currently an absence of global control mechanisms that are transparent and based in science, that some of these technologies may have serious consequences at local and regional level, and that these technologies may disencourage a real reduction of emissions that would disproportionately affect developing countries. Finally, Argentina will strongly align with those that see UNEA addressing the need for more financing for implementing environmental commitments. However, we caution against a work that exclusively focuses on the alignment of the financial system that definitely is well beyond the scope of UNEA and does not address the need to fulfill the financial commitments made by developed countries within the framework of existing multilateral environmental agreements. To conclude, we thank you, ED, again for this report that helps us to initiate discussions on these very important issues, and we look forward also to future occasions, like in the annual subcommittee of the CPR, where member states will start introducing their draft resolutions for consideration of the whole membership of UNEA. Thank you very much again.
I thank the representative of Argentina, and then I'll give the floor to the representative of United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. And thank you to the Executive Director for her briefing and her perseverance today through it. Our delegation would like to begin by echoing the Executive Director's comments on the member state-led nature of the UN Environment Assembly and the resolution process in particular. We are very much in agreement. In addition, we would like to recall the draft resolution submission guidelines endorsed in July at the joint UNEA and CPR Bureau meeting. Submission of draft resolutions according to these guidelines will facilitate coordination with capitals and among permanent missions here in Nairobi. The United States believes a UNEA featuring a select number of carefully crafted, impactful, and widely supported resolutions will be more successful in the long term than an assembly with a quantity of resolutions exceeding UNEP's mandate and available resources. We welcome consistency between resolutions adopted and UNEP's existing approved program of work and budget. In our own considerations in tabling a UNEA 6 draft resolution, we aim to ensure that UNEP is focused on issues it has capacity for, on topics that have broad consensus support, and on topics within its legal mandate. We look forward to collaborating with other delegations on these important discussions. Now, I'd like to make a few comments on the content of the Executive Director's report. First, the United States supports UNEP scaling up its work to improve air quality, as air pollution remains the single largest environmental cause of death. Second, we welcome UNEP's focus on minerals and metals used for sustainable transition. UNEP has an important role to play in advocating for stronger international standards for responsible mining, ideally by leveraging existing international voluntary consensus standards rather than creating new standards or criteria. Finally, on Section E regarding climate altering technologies and measures, I think we have many of the same observations as the European Union. In our view, it's problematic to lump carbon dioxide removal and solar radiation management together as climate altering technologies and methods. These are fundamentally different technologies with different potential benefits and distinct potential consequences. Grouping them together obscures these differences and could easily lead to recommendations that are not optimal for potential development of either technology. Second, it's important for research on solar radiation modification to take a holistic approach. This means examining and acknowledging the potential benefits of solar radiation modification in addition to the potential negative consequences. Given the need for substantial additional discussion on this matter, the United States cannot currently support the creation of an ad hoc expert working group as proposed in the ED's report at this time. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Radhika, and good afternoon, colleagues. And I would like to add my voice to thanking the Executive Director for being with us, even though maybe not in the best shape. But thank you very much for the presentation, but also we would like to thank the Executive Director and their team for sharing with us ideas that UNEP as a whole sees beneficial for us to consider working towards UNEP. That's well appreciated, even though we recognize, like other member states have said, that we have agreed that UNEA is a member state driven forum. And at the same time, I think this allows us to make as best as use as we can from the knowledge and the insights of the Secretariat. So we would like to thank you for that. Let me first align ourselves with the points raised by the European Union, and I would like to bring forward a couple of additional points and maybe some questions. First of all, we appreciate that the introduction links the environmental crisis to other pressing issues, in particular poverty eradication, but we do agree with some member states that have expressed that to achieve sustainable development, we should also look to inequality and the social and economic pillar as a whole. Secondly, we also agree with those who highlighted that we hope that this UNEA will help us to take further action to enhance implementation of agreements that we have already made, and that we can advance support to countries in implementing multilateral environmental agreements by where it's relevant, initiating global, regional, or national action. And for the 6 areas that you have proposed, we would be interested to have further information, in particular how UNEP can play a role to bring those issues forward, or where you see that global action could be relevant to match the criteria that you have highlighted for bold action outlined in the document. We also think that this UNEA, to make a link with the Summit of the Future, could also look or think about providing youth with greater agency in different forms. And we would consider that it might be useful in developing further leadership dialogues towards UNEA. We could consider good youth representation during the high-level segment of UNEA to provide a platform for active engagement of youth in UNEA, depending on which topics we choose to put central in our meetings. On the specific topics, we would have a couple of additional questions. In particular, with regards to the global biodiversity framework, where you have explained indeed that there may be merit to put IPLC rights more at the center. We would be interested to hear from you how UNEP could play a role in that. Recognizing that indeed IPLCs are, the role of IPLCs are very important to achieve implementation of the framework. With regard to, we welcome with regard to the item B on water and the link with climate, that this is an issue where UNEP could play a useful role also as a custodian to some of the SDG targets. And we would be interested to hear a bit more how you see that UNEP, in particular with the small team that the ED referred to, could play a role to strengthen the link between climate and water, as you had highlighted in your briefing. With regard to nutrients, we recognize the points raised in the document, and we believe that a more integrated approach with a broader focus on different nutrients may be fruitful, and also be in line with the global biodiversity framework targets. And we do see a merit in having further work done by UNEP on the matter. And we are also wondering how you see that these synergies could be achieved with the ongoing efforts that we have already taken on nitrogen. I would like to echo the points raised on SRM and CDR by the EU. And with regard to the financial system alignment, again, a question, if you could clarify further what concrete actions or concrete recommendations you could make with regard to UNEP's role in helping moving forward alignment of the financial system, and what is it exactly that UNEA could address to make further progress on that? Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Netherlands. I don't see any other requests for the floor at this stage. So if that's the case, may I give the floor to the Executive Director? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for these very, very helpful comments. I'll try to do justice to them. Let me start at the top and express my appreciation to the distinguished representative of our presidency. It's heartening to feel that the presidency feels that this is a helpful report. I should remind distinguished participants that there has always been a tradition from the beginning of UNEA of an ED's report. This is not the first time, and you will find that there was one for UNEA 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. What I guess we have done with this report, as I said in my opening, is considering the theme, considering what waves may be on the shore, and well understanding what UNEP role is vis-a-vis that of member states, which is the sovereign responsibility for identifying areas. Nevertheless, we are the scientific thrust of that you have created, and it's incumbent upon us to put out to you the issues that we may see and wish to bring to member states' attention. Then, of course, thereafter, as I said in my opening, it is entirely in the hands of member state. And I really appreciate that that's also the sentiment of the presidency. To the distinguished delegate from Costa Rica, very happy on the mention of nature-based solutions, which obviously the last UNEA grappled with and is still working on. And it's an absolutely critical tool in our toolbox of creating resilience, sustainability, as well as often justice and equity. So that's certainly how we see it. We are, however, also at times seeing it misused by certain factions or parties, and that's a no-no. And I know that member states in this assembly very much agree with that. To the distinguished ambassador from Brazil, I think with here, I couldn't agree with you more on pretty much everything you said. You missed my opening, but that's, and you were referring, of course, to the written document and not to the spoken, which is well understood. But we see sustainable development as an absolute where environment plays one pillar, as I said in my opening, but very much on the three-legged stool, dealing with if we are to address poverty, we cannot do that without through the environmental lens alone if we do not understand the social and the economic drivers, which are often driving injustice. And since you mentioned environmental racism, I should mention to you that we were very proud in 2021 to give the Earth Champions Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, to the African-American professor, Professor Bullard. Precisely, he is considered the father of environmental racism, at least in Anglophone literature, having published extensively on this in the United States. And I think we at UNEP are very much aware of that as a dimension to be considered when we talk about injustice. And often, of course, whether it be communities that have less power in the setting power structure or indigenous people, they are often indeed at the brunt of this. I do appreciate your observation that we are seeking to, and we will continue to seek to invite governing bodies of MEAs to host their COPs here. It is, of course, out of my hand, like many other things. I'm often I wish that we had a different future, a different past that has been written in this regard, but here we are. And so the MEAs are based in many places, and there are many other interests in the COP that plays out. But we have shown that we can deliver a COP as we did with the MOP just now, the Montreal Protocol. We do not have the space for a full CBD. I think we concluded that with Elizabeth Marema. But one fine day we shall, because we are building and expanding. You highlighted how we would seek to further improve the implementation at national level and wished for me to elaborate on that. Part of what we're doing exactly, as a matter of fact, this week, and which you also mentioned briefly in the CPR, is that we have all of our country focal points here precisely so that because we are a small band of people, that we can brief and work and train our people in the regions who are closest to the client, if I may say it this way, and so that they, through the UN country teams, can be much more effective and impactful. And we have to say that the resident coordinators are greatly appreciating where UNEP can do just that. In my mind's eye, in my mind's dreams, of course, I would have liked that we had much, much more resources that we could staff up at national level. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And I, like you, I am an admirer and a frequent reader of all things that happened between 72 and now. And so when one takes that quote, which has become the most famous quote from Mrs. Gandhi's speech, it is not to in any way misrepresent, but it is just because it is a very powerful and eloquent way. She said, how can we speak of those who live in villages and in slums about keeping the oceans and the rivers and the air clean when their own lives are contaminated at the source with poverty? And I think that's the spirit of what I sought to convey in that quote. Let me now go to the points raised by the distinguished representative from Colombia and the significant emphasis distinguished representative put on the loss of forest ecosystems. Thank you. Part of why I am having this call is because we were in Brazzaville and there was a lot of calls going around, but it was definitely worth it. And we were very pleased to see the Congo Basin, very strong push. I think Brazil and the Amazon Basin that happened earlier this year set the tone for what can be done at a basin level. And the aspirations that this summit exhibited on finding greater coordination, if I may say so, and collaboration amongst these three absolutely critical basins, the lower Mekong, Borneo, the Amazon, and the Congo, is critical. To the distinguished delegate from the EU, I guess the first point is you would have liked to have seen more details on how to translate decisions at implementation to national level. I guess that lays a little bit beyond the realm of this paper, although I think it's a very important topic for ministers to have themselves because, well, knowing that decisions they take here at UNEA have national implications, and also well knowing that UNEP will not be able to, quote unquote, implement it at the national level. So what shifts is it then that needs to happen to enable these things? Attention on circular economy, very critical. We've framed it throughout that when we speak of nature action, climate action, and pollution action, what is driving the drag on these 3 dimensions is indeed the SDG 12, if you like, unsustainable consumption and production, if you term SDG 12 on its head. I mentioned in my introduction the focus on Indigenous people, well knowing, of course, that this full-fledged topic belongs other places as well as here. But people who are the stewards of the lands have an interaction with protection, with conservation, which is where UNEP comes in. And they have voices and history and science that may not be written, but nevertheless true, that brings about solutions to crises. And so we would see ourselves in the mirror of the environmental dimensions of where Indigenous people bring that solution space. On your issue on water, yes, of course, from the mountaintop to the oceans and the estuaries, that is very clear. I take note on the mistake referencing UNFCCC. Thank you for that observation. There was a question on the Global Forum on Mining and Metals. And just to say that in this respect, the Intergovernmental Forum on Minings and Metals, I think here we see the work very much. This is more than, it is a forum, as you may know, of more than 80 member countries that work to advance sustainable development through the goals of laws, policies, and regulations for the mining sector. And as part of our consultation, or your consultations, under Resolution 512, the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining and Metals has been engaged in the process since they bring together a platform of 80 countries. I hope that responds to your question. Sorry, nutrients. Yes, the question was with respect to nutrients and the extensive work already done on nitrogen. And frankly, I think that is amazing work that has been done over several UNEA cycles. And it was important maybe as a first start, but as we all know, and as I said, and I wish to insist on this, this is not in any way to be seen as an anti-fertilizer issue, and it's very important that everyone hears us on this. Fertilizers are a critical dimension to food security and a critical, so that's a very important point. However, we also know that too much can have absolutely detrimental impact on not only the land itself, but the waterways, the small streams, and the oceans, causing dead zones. And so looking at, and since these resources are finite, how can we ensure that we manage them well and also manage the runoff? And my sense would very much be that if member states were to consider that this would be useful, that they would instruct us to build the synergies, because it would be very unhelpful if we started parallel processes, I would suggest. And on the issue of SRM, definitely these are separate, CDR and SRM. We mention it only as a point because it is often mentioned in continuity in elsewhere. We have now briefed on the One Atmosphere report here in Nairobi to permanent representatives, in Geneva to permanent representatives, and in New York to permanent representatives. And there is tremendous interest, but there's also the fact remains that this is not a topic that most member states are familiar with. And our report, the One Atmosphere, has laid a quick and helpful foundation, however thin, because much more work is obviously needed from a scientific base that should have member states involved, which is why we suggested that this might be a topic for consideration. And let me not say that the only way of doing this was an AHEG. It is just but one tool that member states have in their toolbox through which they can together create a greater understanding of a topic that may not yet have full appreciation full understanding amongst the 193 member states. To Argentina, thank you for the stress that you're placing on a balanced approach to sustainable development, something to which you will find that we are completely in agreement. On the issue of nutrients and leaving it to FAO, the issue is absolutely when it comes to farmers' fields and the kind of frameworks that our friends in FAO do and do well. Once it get into nature, we and beyond the nation, into oceans, etc., it often is no longer, I would posture, no longer a POSIT and no longer an FAO dimension becomes an environmental issue, which is, of course, why Sri Lanka has been such a proponent of at UNEP 4 and UNEP 5 to look at nutrients, this time nitrogen. And so we would not at any way wish to step into the FAO space. That's absolutely clear. We do not have the competencies. However, once we get beyond that space into the environment, we have been recognized for a number of years to have a role. So I just want to say that that we well understand where we stop and where FAO start, and we work extensively with our friends at FAO. On the critical minerals, you highlighted that. And as I said also in my opening, it is absolutely clear that mining is going to be an important part of the energy transition. And how then, so I think there we have very, very strong agreements. How then can we support member states in ensuring that this be done with a minimum impact on environment and on for longer term sustainable use, being very mindful also of the EU points around circularity. To the US, thank you. We completely agree, obviously, that, as I said in the opening, that this space is member states' sole domain. But we are often asked, nearly in every meeting, what are the issues? And our previous ED's papers have been more guarded. But I felt that there were some issues that we could put on the table here for consideration, well aware that member states will have absolute decisions making in this regard. I think from a UNEP perspective, whilst we are not supposed to have views, but from a personal perspective and from a UNEP perspective, fewer resolutions are helpful because we are only a small band of people helping you implement them. And obviously we would wish for them, like everyone else I know, that they would be impactful. To the Netherlands, thank you for the comments. I think, I mean, there were many comments. Let me just, I mean, this is beyond what will happen at UNEA. Many of the comments beyond the resolution space where we were horizon watching and identifying potential areas. But you mentioned a lot of other issues that are very important, like youth, like social and economic pillars, etc. We would obviously wish to, and I think we are casting UNEA very much with a youth element. And we seek to, with the limited resources that we do have in our work, to draw in youth. And in fact, just today, the Royal Visit is meeting with one of our youth programs in Mombasa, the capture the tide turners, because we have mobilized, since we do not have many of the youth networks, including the scouting network and many other networks in countries where these are present. And we would obviously wish to see strong youth participation here. With respect to water and how we would wish to step up, I think we always seek to, when member states tell us that it is an issue, we realign to an extent. And we hope that then member states would also follow through with additional resources. And at times we can also mobilize the science that is out there and willing to be playing a role within UNEP in one way or the other without necessarily adding staff and that kind of muscle. On the nutrients, thank you for mentioning the integrated approach. That is very much how we see it. And on the financial alignments, I think our paper sought to certainly suggest some areas where UNEA may wish to opine. And in a way, let me just find them here. I mean, what we sort of reflect in the paper is that the regulatory criteria today on green or sustainable taxonomies is very unclear, and there are a number of actors in this space. Companies are feeling overburdened with many frameworks that they have to, whether they're doing business in one country or another, the framework is heavy. But is it right? Does it have the weight? Is it greenwashing? How do they know that it is the right one? Opining in this space could be helpful also because we are seeing considerable pushback in certain quarters by antitrust concerns and others to seek to undermine collective action. And we'll be happy to take it into a deeper discussion subsequently. So I think to my colleague Radhika that I've tried to answer everything. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Executive Director. Just wanted to inform that she would have to leave shortly, but I do have an additional request for the floor. So while we take the statement from the representative of Kenya, if the ED leaves, then other colleagues at the podium will take over in terms of responding. So I now give the floor to the representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor. And thank you, Madam Edie, for the elaborate report. And we wish you quick recovery from the cold. We would like to thank you for this briefing. And we note that UNEA 6 embraces science, and the 6th assessment report of the IPCC paints a bleak situation where the world is off track in achievement of the 1.5 degree target. And we hope for a quick turnaround to achieve that target. We also look forward, Madam Edie, for progress on the implementation of resolutions, especially resolution 5/1 on the animal welfare, environment, and the SDG nexus. We are appreciative of your recognition of the expression of caution for embracing new technologies whose impacts are yet to be fully grasped, especially the SRM. And finally, Madam Chair, we'd like to inform as much as we know that many members of the Africa Diplomatic Corps are in Naivasha, and they are following online, and they are fully behind your statement. Thank you.
I'm delighted that our African distinguished ambassadors are following. They are in Naivasha and having a very good exchange. And in fact, our deputy was there just earlier today. I do very much appreciate this opportunity. I think that we will. There are a few edits that we will make in the report based on these the comments that we have received. And we'll be very interested in seeing how, looking ahead, because the truth, I think, is that previous ED's reports have not caught the eye of delegations too much, and how we can think about making this ED report relevant to member states, staying within the realm of where UNEP works, but nevertheless relevant and helpful as member states prepare themselves for the UNEA. So with that, let me express my deep thanks for this opportunity, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Executive Director for her briefing and also the delegations for their contributions and feedback and for taking the time out to be with us here either in person or online. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.